Hey, Underground Sessions podcast listeners. I am here live at the Content Conference. We're recording a few podcasts. I know you heard her before, but today we're interviewing Adrienne Livingston. She works for World Venture, and her focus is human sex trafficking. Really important issue in our day and age. We're also going to dive into pornography, the pornography industry, how that intersects with the issue of human sex trafficking. I hope you stick around for this really, really important episode and that it both benefits you and challenges you. All right, Adrienne, hey, welcome to the Underground Sessions podcast. We had you on Behind the Pulpit, and then Tim said, hey, we got to get Adrienne on Underground because she's underground material.
There we go.
So she's here. Well, we're so glad you've been with us for the week. We are live at the Content Conference on Saturday, February 1st, recording this, and you just finished your breakout session. How did it go?
It went very well and had some great questions afterwards that, even one question was, do you allow sleepovers because of parents learning about this issue of trafficking and knowing that sometimes it's someone that you know, whether they try to abuse you or just do something that's inappropriate. And for me, I don't have kids, but it was, because I do this work, it would be very challenging for me to do sleepovers. But if someone does, I said, you know what you might want to consider is we have an activity in our Girl Empowerment curriculum, which for those that don't know is a curriculum that's a sex trafficking and domestic violence prevention curriculum for middle and high school girls. And we have an activity where, again, because it's to prevent this from happening, is we have safety questions. So we say, what if you're in a situation you don't feel safe, you feel that you're in a dangerous situation, that what you could do with your girls or your youth is ask them, what if you're at a sleepover and an adult approaches you and does something that's inappropriate, what do you do? And start talking them through that. Yeah. And then also making sure that these girls, and we're specifically at this point talking about girls, whereas young men and boys need this as well, and they need to have men speaking into their lives and women to help them understand what is healthy, what is not healthy, but basically letting them know to use your voice. Don't be quiet. Oftentimes girls don't want to necessarily call attention to themselves, and so they won't say anything, but it's saying, no, your voice is a tool. So having them even practice yelling or saying, what you're doing is inappropriate. I'm just not trying to, scream into the mic here, but really having them go through those what if questions if they're going somewhere so that they know how they've pre-thought about it. That visualization is you're taking it a step further as you're actually practicing it so that they actually have responses, but then also knowing that their voice is valuable and to use it and to not be diminished and to say to them, should anything happen, I will come and get you at any time in the morning. If it's 2 a.m., 3 a.m., something happens, call me. I will pick you up. So to start even going through those situations prior to sending your child whatever, if it's a concert, what if? And ask those questions and having them engage the youth in answering the question first, and then you fill in what they don't fit in. Fill in. So it was a really, really good session. Good.
Well, so for those that didn't get to see the session, didn't get to see our Behind the Pulpit interview, why don't you just give us a quick overview of your ministry and what you do? You focus on human sex trafficking. What exactly is that? Give us a flyover.
Okay, yeah. So the definition of sex trafficking is when force, fraud, or coercion is used to cause a commercial sex act. And a commercial sex act is anything in exchange of value for something sexual. So whether it's money being exchanged for, whether it's prostitution, someone being prostituted, whether it's pornography, what people don't realize is that sometimes they're in those images because they're being trafficked and exploited, but that's in exchange for money or anything of value to someone who's homeless and needs a place to sleep or to have food. So on the street, you might have someone say, hey, I will provide you a place to lay your head if you provide this for me, which could be sexual. So for me in this ministry, when I started with World Venture, it was learning about the issue, understanding the continuum, understanding that there are ways people can help, from education and awareness to ending the demand, really focusing on if there wasn't a demand for this issue, there would not be a need for supply. And I hate saying that the supply is human bodies. We are not to be commodified. So really addressing ending the demand. There's advocacy and knowing the different laws and policies that actually help facilitate this, to really fight against that, to prevention, which is what I focus on, especially with our girls. And it's not that I don't want to work with young boys. What I want is more men stepping up to the plate, saying, I will engage these young men. I will help. There are things, I'm not a man. I'm not a young boy. I don't know certain things that they need to have addressed with them. And so it's saying, men, you need to help here. And there is a program that I do know, I think they are creating a curriculum for boys. But the one that I am working with is our girl empowerment curriculum, specifically working with middle and high school girls. What we do is we try to train the trainer and training the youth leaders to facilitate it with their girls. And what I have found is not only does it benefit the girls that they're training, but when we actually train the youth leaders, many of them have said this is new information for them, so they too learn. And that has been an eye-opener to me.
Yeah.
But what we take the girls through, we take them through healthy and unhealthy relationship characteristics, truly knowing what they are. Do you know what the real definition of love is? So that if someone tries to emulate love, you can tell if it's a fictitious love, it's a fake love, it's not real love. Or do you know your boundaries? Have you ever written down what your boundaries are? Do you know when someone's trying to exercise a boundary creep and have you do something that you don't want to do, but it's so gradual you may not notice it, but here are different things that we give them so that they notice, well, if you say you don't like heights and this person's, and I'm using this as a very innocent example, but saying, I know you say you don't like heights, but just step up one level on this ladder. And next thing you know, you've stepped up 10 levels and you look down and you are so fearful of heights. And the reason you didn't want to get up there is because you have vertigo and you might fall. But all of a sudden you're up there. You never thought you'd be up there and you don't even see a way down. That's what happens in this issue of trafficking or even domestic abuse, where with trafficking, you never thought you would be going and doing the sexual favors for someone.
Yeah.
You don't want to lose your boyfriend. So you're going to go do it. Sometimes you don't know if money's being exchanged, and then you don't feel like you can get out. So we go through different scenarios with them so that they can see these are unhealthy. It's red flags. This person really is not caring for you. We want to give them the tools so they can prevent it. In that, especially in church context, we want to have real conversations with girls and create safe, non-judgmental space for them to say what their reality is so that we can really help them.
Good. Well, since we spoke on Monday, Tim and I, we had a chance to attend your training session, and you gave us a bit of a flavor of what you cover when you meet with the girls, the teenage girls. And then we also had some male issues we wanted to ask you about.
Yes.
But so the training session that we attended, you kind of really focused on a number of different activities on how you can help young ladies gain their voice and their confidence. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what it was that you covered with us, and I'll give you my impressions of it.
I would be delighted to hear your impressions, especially as a man in this, in this community where you do see youth. But some of the activities, I did a what if corner where it's the safety questions. What if I'm in a situation I don't feel safe? And so what we do and what you did was create those questions. What if I'm walking home alone at night and I think someone is following me? What do I do? So what we do is ask the girls to just list out all of their what if questions. Sometimes they focused on social media and bullying. It's like ask any question where you feel that you are not safe and you don't know what to do. You're in danger. Typically, we ask that in the very first class. And what we say is we want you to get them all out. We're not going to answer them now because what we want to do is take you through the full 7-module curriculum. And at the very last class is where before we answer them, we want you to answer them based off of all of your learnings. So we did that. What we also did was talk about intuition and, the activity of your body is healthy and then you can get sick. So what's happening in your body when you're getting sick? You might have a fever, you might have a sore throat, you start coughing to the point of if you need to go to the hospital, not breathing, especially, for example, COVID, people had to go to the hospital. Unfortunately, we had a lot of deaths. But your body is speaking to you. Your body is giving you messages. And then likening that to our safe to dangerous continuum, saying, okay, so what's happening in your body when you feel that you're in danger? Oh, I get butterflies in my stomach. I have the hair stand up on my neck, or I get very sweaty. My heart is racing. Again, your body is speaking to you. Yet, unfortunately, we don't necessarily listen to our body when we feel that we're in danger, depending on the situation. You might think, oh, this person, they really don't mean harm. And you start to dismiss it, even though in your gut you had butterflies. It's like something is wrong. And I know one book that I encourage you all to consider and to read is called The Gift of Fear. I highly recommend adults to read that, because the person who wrote that was a detective, and he said, the gift of fear can help you stay out of dangerous situations. And when he interviewed a lot of individuals, both male and female, he asked them, and these are individuals that had, been attacked. He asked them, was there anything in your gut that told you something wasn't right? And they all said yes, but they dismissed it. And so what we talk to the girls about is, just like your body is giving you signals when you're getting sick, it's the same thing. It's speaking to you when you're in a dangerous situation, even if you can't see it. Say you have no idea, you just don't feel something is right. Listen to it. Don't dismiss it. Humans are the only mammals that second guess their intuition. Also, I call it discernment. God has given us the gift of intuition, the gift of discernment. And so to listen to it. And even if you listen to it and something happens, it's still not your fault. Because just as we try not to get sick because, we try to, sleep the 8 hours, drink water, exercise, take vitamins, sometimes you still get sick. Same with being in a dangerous situation. Even though there are times you try, maybe something still happens. That is not on you still. Do not take on that blame. It is the attacker that chooses to attack.
Well, one of the things that I thought was really helpful was we all got in a circle and you had us go around and you had somebody put their hand on the person next to them. First you had to ask, can I put my hand on you? And the person could say yes or no. And then the person who you were putting the hand on then had to tell the person who was basically the receiving from them what they didn't like. And that may sound like, as you're listening, kind of like a silly exercise, but in reality, for a lot of people, it's very hard to tell them what they actually think and what they like and they don't like.
Right.
And so I can see, certainly in the work that you're doing, where young women would say, they're thinking, I really don't want to do this, but they don't want to be rejected or they don't want to be looked down upon or something like that. So I found that to be a very helpful exercise.
Wonderful.
At least putting us in the skin, so to speak, of the person who you're training.
Yes.
And then you were telling us there was a lot, like when you actually do it with young women, they feel like there's a weight that has come off of them, and they feel empowered.
Yes.
Which is, of course, the goal of the curriculum.
Yes. So that we call it the define and tell activity. So basically, to know your boundaries. If you don't know your boundaries, sometimes it's hard to articulate someone crossing them. And so what we say is, think of some boundaries that you have, and in that, the reason we said that we wanted people to ask if they could be touched is because we want to teach girls and individuals consent, and not just saying, sure, why not? No, we want you to say a strong yes or a strong no. But in that is, once someone crosses your boundary, how do you tell them, if it's a friend, in a nice way, that they've crossed your boundary and that you don't like it and you want them to change? So for example, it is define the behavior, tell them what you don't like about it, and then what you want them to do to change it. An example would be, Pastor Bob, I know you love social media and I know you like to take selfies with your friends and just automatically post on social media. That's the behavior. I'm not really comfortable with that. I don't like my image out there. That's telling them what I don't like about it. And then the next is, then before you take a picture of me with you in a selfie next time, can you ask me first and get my permission? And if you're a great friend, you'll say, yes, I'm sorry, etc. But that 3-step, define and tell, giving them voice and words to tell someone in a nice way that I didn't like that, it's something crossing my boundary. If the person listens, great, that's showing that that's being a good friend. If they don't, and you tell them again and they still continue to do that, then the question is that a good friend if they're not respecting you? So then you have a choice to make. And it might be that's not a person that is the best influence in your life at that time. That's a friend. But we didn't have time with you all in the room, but we do it if it is a date. We do have them practice it if it's a stranger. When it's a stranger, we tell them you can't say please and you can't say thank you and don't smile. And believe me, it's hard to do.
Yeah, it was definitely a difficult exercise, except for Tim. Tim did a really good job. He was a natural
He really was a natural.
Exercise. So you're not going to intimidate that guy. So one of the things that we were talking about, me and Tim, producer Tim over there, was he wanted to forward the first conversation we had on Monday onto his boys, high school boys small group, because he thought it was super important. And one of the issues we don't talk about a lot on this platform, although maybe we need to cover this because it's a real problem, is the issue of pornography. So I wonder if maybe you can talk a little bit about how pornography might be playing into this epidemic of sex trafficking.
Yes. Pornography is a huge driver of the demand. What happens is when you look at the buyers, 2/3 are married and 2/3 have kids. And what they say are those that are married, they see the images in pornography and they don't want to do those different positions with their spouse. So they will seek out someone and purchase them to act out those fantasies with a separate person. And so hence purchasing. What happens in pornography is when someone has watched it, dopamine is being released in their brain. So that chemical, that's kind of that happy hormone and chemical. And they liken it actually to heroin and an addiction to heroin, where when you first start watching it, you have that dopamine. But in order to get that same dopamine release, you actually have to watch more. So say you start with images in print. The next, it escalates to then it's video to get that same dopamine release. But then at that point, it kind of plateaus. And then what is the next step? Maybe going to strip clubs. What is the next step? Escalating. It then can go to purchasing someone for sex. And so with that, it's because it's normalizing violence. About 88 actually had some statistics.
And that's an important point, that it is very violent.
It's very violent.
It's not an intimate act. It's a violent act when it's done in this context.
Right.
Yeah.
And so according to a 2010 study, 88% of the scenes in pornography contain physical aggression and 48% contain verbal aggression. That's not sex education. That's violence. And so you are normalizing violence in sexual behavior, and it's actually contributing to rape culture. But it's not telling the truth of what true intimacy is. And so you have that. But then as far as kids, it's not a matter of if a child will see it. It's a matter of when. So we even need to talk with our children about this and what to do if they see it. There's actually a book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, which is a read aloud book for parents that starts very young and very age appropriate, that I would highly recommend parents get to read with their kids. And they have books going up to different levels.
I have it. I'm planning on doing that with my daughter very soon.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was recommended to me.
Oh, good.
I think, and actually, along with what you were doing, my understanding of the book is that it actually it empowers the kids to recognize when things are wrong and say, I'm not having any part of that, so they can run away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then to come to a parent to say what they saw.
Yes.
And so the statistic...
It's giving them a tool to combat what they might encounter.
Exactly. And the statistic is 15% of kids under the age of 10 will first see pornography, and then the average age is 12 that they see it. So again, it's not a matter of if, but when.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah.
And I think, culturally speaking, let's just say you have a teenage boy who starts to watch pornography in their teen years, and then they look at that and they see that as being, well, that's the way sexual acts should be. And then you get into an actual relationship and you're expecting that hopefully your spouse will be doing that. And that creates a very unhealthy dynamic in terms of how the sexual intimacy should work. That can create a lot of problems. If you think pornography is not affecting anybody, that's a very wrong assumption. Certainly the people that are making it, they've had a cost of doing it, and then it's actually having a cost on your soul and your future relationships.
Correct.
Yeah.
Sometimes people think it's a victimless crime, and it's not a victimless crime. There are so many victims. In fact, what people don't realize is that in these images, there are people who are acting, and some are actually forced to be in those images. So first and foremost, they themselves are exploited, but you who are looking at it, you don't see that. You don't know that. You're not aware of it. But then sometimes you have someone who says that they choose to be in these images, and I've spoken to women who have said that they chose to be and that they signed contracts that stated there were certain things that they would not do. They say, yeah, that doesn't really work, because what happens is once you get into the room and they're filming, the producers will say, if you don't do it, you're going to be blacklisted. And or not even that, sometimes they're just literally raped. But when you're watching it, you don't know that that person's being raped. So you have that, but then yourself, you don't know as far as your neural pathways. You're looking at something that is violent, and you're having an unhealthy connection to this sexual intercourse, which it becomes a thing and not the gift that God has given us, where it's intimacy with the person. That what is happening is you're not loving on a person. That is not love, period.
Yeah. I know this isn't behind the pulpit, but I just can't help myself but make a book recommendation.
I think I did too,
You
right?
You did. Okay, so maybe you can tell us which one you want to do. So this book, it's a little bit older, but it's still very relevant. Written in 2009 by William Struthers, and it's a book called Wired for Intimacy: How Pornography Hijacks the Male Brain. And he just kind of goes through everything scientifically, spiritually, how it just kind of rewires you to want it. And you were mentioning the whole dopamine hits and everything. I forget if you mentioned it here or someplace else about the addictive nature of it. It's almost like heroin, or
like heroin.
Yeah. So there you go. It's like you just need another hit,
Exactly.
and it's once you get into it, if I could use the theme of our conference, once you drift into it, it's very hard to get out of that. It's almost like getting caught in a rip current.
Yes.
Pulling you out to sea and
Yes.
drowning you underneath it.
And part of that, especially is talking in our church faith community, so many men and people don't realize that others are going through it. The person who was working on my team, Brian Leak, and specifically to work on ending the demand, he has shared openly, this is a part of his ministry, because he had an addiction. And prior to him giving his life to Christ, he was addicted, gave his life to Christ, and thought, oh, now that I'm a Christian, it will automatically, won't have struggles anymore. That didn't happen. He still was struggling and was going more and more down into the shame hole, thinking, okay, I should be able to conquer this. But it wasn't happening. And again, because he thought he was the only one going through it, he didn't try to seek help because he was feeling shameful. Therefore, it was by the grace of God that he was delivered. But once he was delivered, what his ministry was and is to say, I want to help men who are struggling with this so that they know they're not going through it alone. It's hard to be accountable to something when you have no one to be accountable to, because when you look at pornography, it's on these phones, these devices right here, they're little computers. Oh, those are my little dogs right there. Anyway, and it's anonymous, it's accessible, and it's affordable, free. So for him, it was, how can I help share this with men to say, if you want help, I'm not going to shame you. I want to educate you on what you are contributing to, if you are viewing it, but also what is it doing to you, and I want to help you get out.
Yeah. I would also say too, on the pornography front, I would say it's predominantly a male issue, although I have seen statistics showing that it's growing in the female.
Yes.
For females as well, and probably for different issues, but it's not a male only thing.
Nope.
So don't just assume that if you're a woman, it can't happen to you.
No. In fact, I have some statistics on that.
Give us the statistics.
So, one, for women that are not in faith communities, what they're saying is, and this was probably about 7 years ago that I saw this, so it might have increased by then. At this point, but it was 30% of women outside of the church that were viewing pornography and 15% inside the church viewing pornography. And what they're saying is our culture is even saying if you want to have kind of a sex education, go look at pornography. They're even encouraging couples to look at pornography. So it's not just an individual problem, it's a cultural problem. Looking at also the images of what we do in trying to sell products. They use sexuality and sensuality in selling, whether it's shampoo or perfume, etc. So back in the day, when you looked at pornography, you had Playboy was the magazine, and those, I think when it first started, was kind of, the woman in her bra, whereas now it's escalated to, you see on commercials on our own TV, women in bras or women in underwear.
Yeah.
So you have that, but then you have social media that there are images everywhere inundating us with sexuality and sensuality. So that selling of sex is just a cultural problem.
Yeah. Well, speaking of selling sex, one of the things I mentioned in our Behind the Pulpit interview on Monday that I'll mention here again was this guy Andrew Tate. And after I had mentioned that, I actually came across a Breakpoint article with the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. The title was this: Andrew Tate's Counterfeit Masculinity. And so let me just read you a little bit about his background, and then I'll mention a quote for a talking point. So the article says this: recently, internet celebrity Andrew Tate was back in the headlines after being released from house arrest in Romania. The champion kickboxer turned influencer and life coach is facing charges of sex trafficking, minors, rape, and money laundering. Anyone familiar with Tate's videos won't find these allegations hard to believe. He has openly billed himself for years as a pimp, gotten rich running a webcam pornography ring, and taught men how to manipulate and abuse women via his Hustlers University. Now, if I could skip down, there is a market research company in the UK called Savanta. In 2023, they said this, that one in three, so 33% of 16 to 25-year-old men said they had a positive view of Andrew Tate. Anecdotally, it seems to be more than a few of them are Christian young men, and they quote Nancy Pearcey in her book, The Toxic War on Masculinity, and she recently wrote this on X. And this was the quote that I want to talk about. A former graduate student of mine now teaches at a high school, and she sent me an email saying, all my male students are fans of Andrew Tate. They're even including quotes from Andrew Tate in the yearbook. I asked, where do you teach? And she said, a classical Christian school. Now, the question was, what is the draw of Andrew Tate? And the answer that they were giving was that he's putting forth this counterfeit view of this kind of strong masculinity that some men are missing in other areas of society. But the critique, of course, is that he's got all these problems that he's putting forward. So when we talk about the drift and, the drift both spiritually and culturally, this is the type of thing that can pull you out to sea if you're not aware of it. It seems like it's okay, but it's really taking you down a very dark path. So, yes. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. So where do we start to talk to young men about this? I think church is a really good place. One, speaking, it's not just to young men, it's to old adults, and really starting to address it and approaching and saying that this is a cultural problem. This is happening. And just like we like to have real raw conversations with the girls, I think it's the same with men, and saying that we know that there are men struggling with this. We know where there are men, it's an issue. So to say, we want to be here not to shame you, but to help. If you need help, if churches could create then safe spaces for men and women to go to actually start to address it, I think that's how we can actually start to have change. And because you're creating safe space and you're normalizing addressing your reality and your real issues, people will more likely come forward instead of having a church mask on and not bringing forward what they're really struggling with. I think there's a lot of mask in church. Yeah. And so doing that, with adults, but then also with youth group, having the separate times where you're meeting with girls and having the separate time meeting with boys, having men address this issue with young boys and having women address it with young girls. I do think at times there's good to have crossover, but there are times to definitely be separate and apart. I have noticed not just with young girls, but even with women, if there is a man in the group, the dynamic has changed. It's not as much as a safe environment. So I think this is where churches can step up and have real conversations with youth and adults and have us really not come in like, oh, I'm a good Christian. I don't have any problems. Excuse me, doesn't the Bible say that this is a hospital? So we have issues. We need healing. People need help. We need a true diagnosis of what's going on so that we can have a treatment plan. So I think if we as a church body can take off the condemnation hat, take off the judging hat, we are not here to do that. In Scripture, even Christ, he didn't come to condemn the world, but to save the world. So how can we be that body of Christ that says, you know what, we know these are struggles that we are all having, so how can we come alongside you and help?
Wonderful. And I think that's a great capture for what we need to be doing. So maybe as we wrap up, what are some of the maybe next steps if somebody's listening to this? How can they get involved in your ministry? What would you tell them as far as fighting against sex trafficking, and even, I don't know if you have any thoughts on the pornography piece, but what are a couple next steps that people can do?
So since we started talking about pornography at the end, I'll say Epic Project is a nonprofit I would highly recommend going to. There's also Demand...
Epic with a K, right?
With a K.
Yes.
EPIK Project.
Yes.
But also Demand Abolition is another website you can go to learn more about ending the demand. As far as other websites to get information, Polaris Project is one to get more information about this issue of trafficking and some examples of what people can do and how they can get engaged. For those that possibly are being trafficked, there's a national hotline that for human trafficking that one can call, National Human Trafficking Hotline, but then also Shared Hope International is a nonprofit actually out of Washington state, right next to mine, Oregon, that grades each state to say, how are these states doing when it's coming to preventing and prosecuting with the issue of trafficking. As far as my ministry, for those that are interested, you can go to my email. I'll give you that if you have questions, even some information about the Girl Empowerment Curriculum. My email is a.livingston@worldventure.com. So those would be some ways.
Okay, wonderful. Well, Adrienne, thanks so much for being on all our platforms, but especially today being on the Underground Sessions podcast. We hope you have a wonderful trip back to Oregon, and we're going to have to Zoom you in again.
Yes.
All right,
yes.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for being here. And thanks for watching the Underground Sessions podcast. We will see you next time right here.